Good morning, Humber Valley. Good morning, YouTube. My name is Trevor Brisbin, and thank you for making this part of your day. So this week and the next few weeks are going to look a little bit different. As the province of Ontario remains under stay-at-home orders, out of an abundance of caution, we're not going to be recording at our building. We will record our little parts remotely and then try and build a sort of mosaic of worship from there. So thank you for your patience, and let's work together in order to protect each other. And listen, as hard as this is, mark my words, we will be together. The choir will sing again. So on the liturgical calendar, today marks the third Sunday of Easter. Our spiritual ancestors recognized that Easter is too important to just be a day, so they made it a season. In the capitalist tradition, Easter Sunday has already been exploited to sell chocolate, so it's time to start thinking about the next revenue generator like Mother's Day. But for us who follow the Christ, we mark the 40 days between the empty tomb and the ascension of Christ as the season of Easter, or the season of resurrection. And it's a season of new life, new hope. It's a season of new beginnings. This morning, we're going to dive into a story from John's Gospel about the resurrected Jesus appearing to a guy named Thomas. Now, Thomas, quite famously, has some questions and doubts about resurrection. He's like just not sure what to do with it. Can anybody relate to that? Now, usually when we start talking about Thomas and all of his doubts, the default question we're left with is, do you believe in the resurrection? Like at the end of the story, resurrected Jesus says, blessed are those who believe. Do you believe in the resurrection? And then the question always becomes, what does that mean? Like for 2,000 years, people have been arguing, was it a literal physical resurrection? Was it a metaphorical spiritual resurrection? Do we have to believe one over the other? How much do you have to believe in the resurrection to be blessed by it? Like a 5 out of 10, an 8 out of 10? Can I tentatively believe in resurrection and still be blessed? How does all of that work? I suspect at a church like ours, there are probably some people who believe the resurrection was a literal physical thing, and there are probably others of us who understand it as a metaphorical spiritual thing, which that diversity, I think, is actually an indicator of a healthy community. So the question I want to ask today isn't, what do you believe about the resurrection? That's just not that interesting of a question to me. It's not what do you believe about resurrection. It's how you believe in resurrection. Like, how do you hold your resurrection belief? How do you hold any belief that you have, for that matter? Like, whatever you believe about resurrection, do your beliefs make a difference toward goodness and justice and compassion? Or is it possible that your beliefs and how you hold them can somehow be a barrier to those very things? So this morning we're going to move quickly in 3 different ways as we explore John's story of Thomas. First, we're going to do a quick history lesson. Then we're going to do some good old-fashioned Bible study. And then we're going to try and pull it all together and make some sense of it all. How does that sound? Sound okay? History, Bible, so what? That's where we're going today. So, history lesson. In the first centuries after Jesus, the early church debated amongst themselves about who Jesus really was and what it meant to follow him. There were debates about what foods could be eaten, who should be circumcised, and what really happened with resurrection. There was not one universal understanding of the Christian faith. There has never been, you could say, a Christianity. There has always been Christianities. From the earliest of days, there were debates and arguments about what true Christianity was. Thank God that doesn't happen anymore, right? This is why in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, the Apostle Paul writes to the church and he says, "My siblings, some from Chloe's household have informed me that there are quarrels among you. What I mean is this: one of you says, I follow Paul, another, I follow Apollos, another, I follow Cephas, still another, I follow Christ." What Paul is saying is that there were cliques or groups or tribes that had formed around apostolic leadership in the first centuries, and each had their own emphasis of the faith. Each leader had their own take or hobby horse on what matters most for Christianity, and as you can imagine, they often competed and fought. Now, historians and scholars have shown that there was a notorious tension between a group of Christians who identified with the Apostle John as their leader and a group of Christians who identified with the Apostle Thomas as their leader. They had different visions of what Christianity was supposed to be, especially around the ideas of resurrection. Now, in the Gospel of John, Christianity is portrayed as a very material faith. Jesus is the Word made flesh. The resurrection is a material, tactile thing that can be touched. Like Thomas wants to touch the resurrected Christ. Now, in the Gospel of Thomas, which is a little book that's not in the New Testament, it's not in the Christian scriptures, and that's another story for another time why it didn't get included. But the Gospel of Thomas actually predates the Gospel of John. And in the Gospel of Thomas, Christianity and resurrection are far more spiritual and like ethereal than they are material. And I just wonder if it's helpful to understand that as we hear John tell the story of Thomas, knowing there's tension between the two groups, perhaps what emerges is not just what John believes about resurrection, but also how John holds those resurrection beliefs. Bible study. Did you know that the Gospel of John is the only one of the four Gospels that uses Thomas as a character to tell the story? Like Matthew, Mark, Luke don't mention Thomas at all, except in the various lists of the apostles. For Matthew and Mark and Luke, there is no doubting Thomas. Now, in John chapter 11, we're told a story of a close friend of Jesus, a guy named Lazarus, who dies. Jesus wants to go to where Lazarus is buried, but it's a place that is swarming with religious zealots who want to harm Jesus and his followers. And as John tells us the story of Lazarus, Thomas is the only disciple who's specifically named in the narrative. And Thomas says to Jesus, "If we go to where Lazarus is buried, we too will die there." Which of course doesn't happen. Jesus doesn't get harmed while going to Lazarus. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead. It's a beautiful resurrection story. But it's like John wants to make sure that we know as the readers that in the context of resurrection, Thomas misread the situation. A lot like how in our passage this morning, Thomas is the only one who misreads the situation. Remember the story of the first Easter morning in John chapter 20? We talked about it a couple weeks ago on Easter Sunday. In verse 2, John refers to himself as the disciple Jesus loved, which is a pretty affirming and flattering label to give oneself or to give one's leader. In the very same chapter, verse 24, Thomas is described as now Thomas, one of the 12. John's the one Jesus loved. Thomas is just one of the 12. Now, it doesn't seem like a big deal on the surface, but the only other time John uses the phrase one of the 12 to describe somebody, guess who he's referring to? Judas. Linguistically, John equates Thomas' differing belief about resurrection to Judas's betrayal. Are you with me? It's a lot of information, but stick with me here. Maybe, just maybe, John's gospel has an agenda. Luke 24, verse 12. Luke explicitly tells us that Peter alone ran to the empty tomb on Easter morning. John 20, verse 4, John says, no, it was he and Peter who were running together to the empty tomb. And according to John, John had better cardio and got there first. And then in verse 8, John claims he poked his head into the empty tomb, saw the burial cloth, and instantly, like without hesitation, believed and knew what was going on. He believed resurrection. Like the stories surrounding resurrection in John's gospel are told in such a way where John explicitly gets it and believes it completely and fully, while Thomas, who might as well be like Judas, keeps on missing it. Even Thomas's request to put his hands in Jesus' wounds, it's kind of crass and distasteful, right? So history reveals a deep rift and disagreement between Reverend John and his Christians and Reverend Thomas and his Christians. And just a little bit of scratching at the biblical narrative, we can see John's followers who wrote the gospel bearing his name certainly don't paint Thomas in a very flattering light. So, knowing these things, what are we left with? Like so what? Was Thomas the one thick-headed guy of the 12 who just never got resurrection? Or, in like the 60 years or so between the death of Jesus and when John's gospel was actually written down by his disciples, is it possible that some leaders who identified with John's group may have taken some editorial license in some of the storytelling in order to reinforce the narrative that said their group's understanding was better and superior, and those who identified with Thomas missed it and were doing it wrong? Our group gets what really happened. Their group, never understood. Is it possible that the resurrection story of John 20 also tells the tale of how church folks can fight? Remember, the story about doubting Thomas ends with Jesus saying to Thomas, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen me and yet have believed." When John's gospel was written, John's group of Christians hadn't seen the resurrected Christ, yet they claimed belief. The message is, we're blessed because we believe right. And your group, not as blessed because you believe wrong. Do you see how something as beautiful and inspirational as resurrection can be turned into we're better than you, we're holier than you, we're doing it righter than you, and people who don't agree with us, people who do it differently, people who don't see things the way we see things, those with a different experience, you're ignorant, you're wrong, you're the Judas. Right here, the very first Easter, the epicenter of new life, new hope, new beginnings, is already being colonized with old patterns of tribalism, elitism, and dare I say it, church politics. The default question we want to ask is, do you believe in the resurrection? But perhaps an equally important question is, how do you hold the beliefs, the convictions, and the perspectives you have? Because We now live in a world where the default has too often been to demonize those who view things differently, like they are Judas. It's possible to hold beliefs that are good and beautiful, and at the same time, the way they're held, the posture in which we hold them, actually is damaging and counterproductive. I think it's really important to pause and recognize this in our church's pursuit of transformation. Because the very essence of transformation requires exposing ourselves to different perspectives, novel experiences, and approaches that are maybe new for us. Like if resurrection is about new life, new hope, new beginnings, which I wholeheartedly believe it is, what if that means that if we hold our perspective, our practices, our experiences as being normative or ultimate, and then the things that don't fit that, the things that feel different are to be opposed or criticized, actually misses the very spirit of resurrection? Like when we get to the place where we think that what we've got, like our way is the right way, the normal way, the Christian way to do it, maybe that has more to do with entrenchment or lack of imagination than it does with resurrection. And perhaps it actually neuters the new life and new beginning Spirit is seeking to ignite amongst us. A few weeks ago, Marisol and I bought a new house, which means the last couple of weeks we've been scrambling to get our current house ready for the market. We're in the middle of this right now, and our real estate agent wants us to use a stager. You know what a stager is? Someone who makes the space look like no one has ever lived there because it's like right out of a magazine. So this lovely woman comes to her house and she begins to explain that she will, just walk through with her team and just add some touches. Maybe change out a coffee table, throw in some pillows, just maximize the potential. Well, she starts to wander through our house. And you got to understand, we're at that stage with 3 kids where everything in our house is still kind of sticky. You know what I mean? Like there's stickers on the bedboards and crayons on love seats. And you look under the breakfast bar and there's an army of fruit stickers that have been pasted there. So when she finishes her walkthrough, she looks at us and, trying to be as pleasant and lovely and polite as possible, says, yeah, we're gonna change out all of it. Like literally, none of our furniture should be seen by the public. So what do we do? Do I dig in and insist that the old furniture has to stay? Or do we give it a go with something new, with the new stuff, and see what happens? Because maybe. I'm kind of excited to see what the stager does with the space. She comes in tomorrow, if you're watching this on Sunday. And I'm so excited to see what Spirit might do at Humber Valley. For our God is the God of resurrection, new life, new hope, and new beginnings. And if John's gospel has anything to say to us, perhaps it's an invitation to hold our experiences differently, lightly. For there are always fresh ways of seeing the world and worship and even resurrection. And maybe that's the whole point. Thanks be to God.